you cannot just be siloed as a lawyer only. You cannot just say that I'm going to contribute my legal bit to this and that's it. You guys take up the other bits. No, I have to learn in order to apply my common sense and mind as a lawyer and contribute to the collective decision making.
The time that India was at that time, everything's just opening up. Late 90s, early 2000s. And then you worked on those kind of marquee deals. You were also part of that history in the making.
So I represented the foreign lenders of the Dabhol project. I worked on India's first private sector transmission project when the Electricity Act had newly come in. General Counsel has the word general in. Provide fallbacks on each and every clause, right? The fallback number 1, fallback number 2, fallback number 3, and impose some conditions. They are fulfilled, you can use this fallback option. You are then enabling the front-end team. Look at technology solutions to provide problems at the low end. And then you evolve yourself to the higher level.
Hello and welcome to the Daily Lawyer podcast. My name is Jenna Krishnan. I'm your host and the founder of the Daily Lawyer. And today is the start of a very special series. This series is really close to my heart because once upon a time, this was a title that I also held. This is the General Counsel Series that we are starting on the podcast in collaboration with Zoho Sign, which is part of the Indian-made Zoho suite of products. It's a comprehensive digital signature solution for Indian businesses. I'm going to speak more about Zoho Sign at the end of the video. But for now, I'm so excited to introduce this series. We're going to be speaking with India's leading general counsels or heads of legal of various companies. In and through my own experience, I have seen how the role of a general counsel has evolved over the last decade. I'm sure it has evolved earlier, but it has really evolved over the last decade. Now, I see that general counsels are strategic partners, true ring fencers for in any business for threats, for issues, both internal and external to the business. And I really wanted to bring conversations like this on the podcast. And I'm so deeply grateful to Zoho Sign for enabling this series. With that, I'm so happy to introduce our first guest. We're kicking off this series with Mr. Jasmeet Wadehra. Thank you, Jasmeet, for being part of the Daily Lawyer podcast of the GC series.
Thank you for inviting me, Jana.
So Jasmeet is the head of legal India and South Asia of Visa. He has previously held general counsel positions in various Vedanta Group companies, International Paper, Deutsche Bank, FedEx. And before that, he was in active legal practice as a banking and finance lawyer with Dua & Associates. He's also been honored with several recognitions and awards, the Legal 500 GC India Power List. He was named as a trailblazer by Corporate Counsel USA. And I couldn't be happier to start this series with someone like him. I also want to mention that he's a wonderful human being. He's arguably in a very, very busy work season, but he still managed to give us time to shoot this. So we are very grateful to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jenna, for inviting me again. And it's a privilege and pleasure to be part of your series.
I hope.
And also to be the first one to be invited.
Yes.
So there's no pressure.
No, not at all. Relax.
But let me introduce another aspect of me, which I'm the proudest about. I'm a proud father of two beautiful daughters, one teenager and one close to being a teenager.
Give me a high five. Yeah. I have two daughters.
And their names are Kudrat and Harnoor.
Oh, sweet.
I want to mention this particularly because when we were talking about transformation, right? I think that becoming a father was the most transformative moment for me, both in my professional life and in my personal life. So I have to put that on record.
Plug. We were just discussing before we started recording that Jasmeet's journey into the current role that he's occupying is fascinating. He's done so much of lovely work, and I'm so interested in knowing what were some of the pivotal movements that really shaped the arc of your career? Like if you have to take us back from when you started, why you started, and then now how did you end up here?
Yeah, interesting. So when I was young and in college, right, and in high school as well, right, I was dabbling with various options for myself, right. Some part of my family is into services, so that attracted me a lot. So I went into NDA to look at how things are as an officer in the Indian Army or
Is
Air
it?
Force, right? And also enrolled myself in NCC.
Okay.
But
This
then
is what, in school or after school?
in high school in
Okay,
Ferguson at Pune,
huh.
right?
Oh,
But
you
then
did school in Pune?
I was in Pune.
Okay.
Yes.
Oh.
So the drills, 7 a.m. in the morning, fall-ins, right? Into your military fatigues just wasn't my cup of tea. I then enrolled into CS program, right? Thinking that I would become like either a corporate accountant or a company secretary. And then that's where I developed an interest in law as a career, right? Because CS with either a CA or CS with law was a great career option in the 90s,
Yes.
right? And I said, look, I'm going to do 1 year of law full time, and then I'm going to see, how this is, how life is at the campus, right? And then I'm going to probably move to an evening college and get into work big time because my financial situation in the family was not that great.
And this
at
was
that
in
time.
Pune only, or?
No, in Delhi,
Okay.
right? With
So you
my
moved to Delhi.
undergraduation in
Acha.
commerce. So, so one thing, right, where when I was doing my undergrad, in commerce and at University of Delhi, right, the subjects in law, right, fascinated me a lot. And there were many law aspects in the CS program as well. And I also enrolled in the ICW program. There were some law aspects in that program as well. So those were areas which were very, very interesting, very fascinating, inspired a lot of passion in me. Then I, also recall that as a growing up child, I read a lot of Perry Mason books, a lot of Earl Stanley Gardner's, a lot of, Dan Brown, John Grisham type of books. And there was part of me that was always interested and fascinated by law practice, mysteries, solving, legal problems, right? Investigations and things like that, right? And law as a career choice kind of provided, some bit of that stimulation, so to say, which for which the seeds were sort of sown in the childhood years. So when I went into law school, right, moot courts fascinated me a lot, right? And I enrolled myself into a moot court competition in my first year itself. Just the hours and hours spent in the library, going through commentaries, going through case judgments, having discussions about your legal strategy, about your case submissions, right? And then the actual thrill of arguing a case in the court, well, although a mock situation, but then judges were very tough. Right? So you got to argue your point, you got to listen to the other side, you got to develop counter arguments, and all of that fascinated me a lot, right? So after first year, my choice was well set in stone, and I continued pursuing my full-time law studies for 2 more years, and finally got into law. Through my final year, I interned with a firm called Suri and Company, and I owe a lot of gratitude to Mr. Rupinder Singh Suri, who accepted me as his first law intern.
Wow!
And I hounded him for weeks and weeks. I used to go to him every Saturday, begging to accept me as an intern, and he would say, "Beta, I don't have a space for you in my office," and that was true. He didn't have a chair for me to sit on because it was 40-member law firm and it was all packed, right? But he finally gave in and was very, very magnanimous about it. And, he was my first law guru in the profession. He was an additional Solicitor General and a very senior Supreme Court advocate, office bearer in the Supreme Court Bar Association as well in his life, and a very, very inspiring character, right? More important, he had a lot of humility. He never showed off his knowledge and his skills and experience, and he always supported young lawyers, right? And then he gave me a lot of his valuable time, helped me build my career.
Do you think you've taken any of those? Like, have you?
I am still trying to.
Yeah.
I wish I had the humility like him. I wish I was so down to earth. And I was also, so sort of, strategic in his thinking, right? I was so good with managing clients, managing his own people. I remember we had such a great cosmopolitan culture in the firm back then, right? They never made me feel like I was just an intern, right? I was made to feel as if I was part of a junior legal team. I was given responsibilities like an associate would. We would celebrate every occasion. I remember during Eid, during Ramzan month, right? Every day we would have an iftar party at office, right? Although there were just 2 or 3 Muslims in our group. And it was such a great bonding moment with everyone, right? I'm sure whoever was part of Suri and Company at any point of time would reminisce these days. Yeah.
And then how did that translate into, becoming an in-house lawyer?
Yeah, so that's interesting. I started my formal practice years with Dua Associates. This was a big, formidable law
Yeah.
firm back in the days.
Yeah.
I was in the banking and finance practice, dealing with marquee clients like the World Bank Group, Bank of America,
Fancy,
ADB,
yeah.
doing a lot of interesting deals which made the pink papers,
Wow.
every
But
now and
this
then.
is such a nice start to your career. Yeah.
It was. I was incredibly lucky, I would
Yes.
say, because those used to be very, very coveted positions.
I know.
And my colleagues or my peers in the profession, my law school, right, would really compete and strive very hard to get those associate
and
positions.
also I think the time, right, like the time that India was at that time, everything's just opening up.
Yes.
Late 90s, early 2000s.
Yes.
And then you worked on those kind of marquee
Yeah.
deals. So you were also part of that history in the making.
It was. So I represented the foreign lenders of the Dabol project, which was a very, very good experience. Both the litigation side and the restructuring of the project that we had. I worked on India's first private sector transmission project when the Electricity Act had newly come in, and everyone was struggling with how the industry is going to shape up, how the regulations are going to shape up, how the various regulatory commissions and institutions would shape up, right? And I was part of that journey to set things up, right, to create precedents, right? I remember for the first time, we applied for an approval to create security interest, and we then developed the waterfall structure of creating some kind of security interest over payouts coming from the project, right? This was the first of its kind under the Electricity Act, and we had to walk through the commission on these global structures and how they work and how various situations would pan out, and it was such an interesting exercise. I remember we worked with the regulators back then, RBI. And we used to apply every time for an approval to create security interest. And RBI would, simply say, well, you don't need to apply for those, right? And then they would go back to them and, explain to them how FEMA laws on, transfer of property operate in such a way that foreign interests can't be created into property without the regulator's approval. And thereafter, a whole regime changed.
Yeah.
We got our clients, also part of the Securitization Act at that point of time, right? Which was, again, a very, very big deal. Because they were the only foreign institutions which are made part of the law,
discussion,
right? The special law that was formed for recovery. So it was a very, very interesting
amazing
and incredibly enriching experience at the law firm. But then there were also 16, 17-hour work days.
I know.
And it took a toll. There was a burnout factor. And, at a stage, I had to make a choice between, really looking for a partnership, right? Becoming a sort of more senior lawyer, dealing with a client portfolio of my own, or, an in-house opportunity. And, I chose the latter. GE came to me at that stage. And again, I owe a lot of gratitude to Sandeep Berry, who hired me for my first in-house job at GE. Sandeep has now made the reverse transition from being an in-house lawyer into a practicing lawyer as an equity partner with Sam in Delhi. Yes, he's also my neighbor. So thank you, Sandeep, for all the good hiring that you did.
That is true.
You're incredibly, you have an incredibly good choice.
Yes.
Right. But then,
we agree.
Yeah, you do. So I think that was a great transition point, right, for me. It was a pivot because it was not going to be easy. Being a very successful banking and finance lawyer who had a great career ahead of him, right? And at that stage, we were doing some of the deals which today, even today, many young lawyers, sort of.
Really... Yeah, young, old. It's quite unique, actually.
Yeah. And so some of those structures are still sort of, things
being
which
followed,
people are, these are marquee.
Yes,
right?
yes.
People get interested, everyone gets interested. Consultants, regulators, right? Business people. And I was very lucky and very privileged, and I would say, incredibly fortunate to have experienced that kind of practice, very early in my career, and also in the early stages of the evolution of the Indian industry at that stage, right? In the globalized and liberalized form.
Yeah.
Coming back to in-house roles, so GE, again, like I said, offered me my first in-house role. So 5 days a week, having weekends off was such a delight.
Yeah.
Right? Having the opportunity
such a new concept.
It was.
I tell you.
And you could work remotely because part of my job involved supporting a US business. Part of my job involved, managing an India business as its legal and compliance leader. right? So remote working was something which was in vogue back in 2005 as well, which was very exciting because you got to revive a part of you which you lost in the 16, 17-hour workdays, right? I know it's a hot debate these days with 90-hour works and work days and 100-hour work days, and people keep topping that up in the media, right? That was that. Was a very great and interesting opportunity. I got to do various things with GE as a service industry. I got to learn a lot about taxation structures, about bonding, debonding of businesses, right? Customs laws, about employment laws, about a number of things, right? I also got to work in and lead a team of compliance professionals doing different kinds of processes around the world, right? So experience of dealing with multiple jurisdictions around the world, experience of leading a team was incredibly, challenging as well as enriching, right? And then Deutsche Bank happened. Deutsche Bank came, and I was hired as the first lawyer in India. So I set up the legal department with them. At one point of time, I was the paralegal, a legal assistant,
clerk, everything,
and a legal clerk, and a general counsel at the same time, right? So from dealing with regulatory issues to litigation matters to signing up a brand ambassador, for example. I remember Sunil Gavaskar and Sania Mirza were our brand ambassadors at that point of time, and working with them, working on their contracts, meeting with them was very, very exciting. And we had a great bunch of people, because this was a new business. They were setting up the retail business, and we had pulled in professionals from various banks, right? But we acted as a startup, right? So there was this, everyone had to do everything, and we had to, roll up our sleeves and get our hands dirty and work late hours. But it was very interesting because we built great relationships at that point of time, right? And those relationships are paying off even today. Right? So Deutsche Bank, a number of years, 2 different jobs, one a global role with the investment banking operations as the head of legal. So again, a multi-jurisdiction experience, working for a US operation, a UK operation, an Ireland operation, the Philippines operations, 3 big offices in India, an employee footprint of about 12,000 people. Was great opportunity. And then I also worked with FedEx and International Paper and Vedanta, as you know, before coming to Visa finally for the last 6 years.
Amazing.
In my journey.
Yeah, lovely. But tell me, I want to just pick up from one thing that you said, which is that, when you got into the in-house role, it was like, I can't do this 16, 17-hour days. I need a more realistic schedule for my own physical and mental health. And then for some time it was good. This whole new concept of not working weekends, I can relate because, I also had similar experience, switch from practice into in-house. And then at some point you realize that actually in-house roles are equally very, very hard.
Yeah.
And you also said it yourself when you said about Deutsche Bank. You had to work long hours, you had to do everything. And then, one thing led to the other. Today you're at Visa. But one thing that I want to ask you is, what was, according to you, the biggest shift that you felt you needed to do mentally, maybe, from external to internal role?
Yeah, a couple of things actually, Jana. One, I think as practicing lawyers, we are very tuned up to look at things in black and white.
Yeah.
Right. As an in-house lawyer, you have to be more practical. You have to know your business. You have to offer practical solutions, and also speak the language that your internal clients speak. Yeah. Right. You're part of them. You own the decision.
Yes.
Right. So that is a tuning which is very important when you transition from practicing world to the in-house world. Right. Other than that, I think there's a lot of factors about looking at business at a macro level. Right. Especially if you become a general counsel, right? From growing up the echelons of your hierarchy, right? General counsel has the word general in it, right? Which is very, very important.
Yes.
Right. Not very long back, CXO roles were actually called general manager roles.
Correct.
Right? And the reason is because of the wide ambit and wide remit of the role. Because you have to deal with organization issues, you have to deal with regulatory issues, you have to deal with market issues, you have to deal with reputational issues, you have to deal with your product and product development and innovation, you have to deal with technology, you have to deal with disputes, right?
Correct.
You have to deal with commercial transactions, you have to deal with marketing, you have to deal with so many different
Yes.
facets, finance and accounts.
Yes.
You have to deal with acquisitions and other strategic decisions,
Yeah.
right, for the business,
Yeah.
right? So you have to do a lot of this, right,
Yeah.
as a general counsel. And when you have the seat at that table, right, you cannot just be siloed as a lawyer only. You
Correct.
cannot just say that I'm going to contribute my legal bit to this and that's it, right? You guys take up the other bits. No, right? So my philosophy particularly also has been that when I'm at the table, right, with my colleagues in finance, colleagues in marketing, colleagues in regulatory affairs, or colleagues in business, right, I have to learn a lot of what they do in order to apply
Yes.
my, common sense and mind as a lawyer, right, and contribute to the collective decision making.
Yeah.
But I also I have a duty to the organization and to my colleagues to leave a little bit of me in them, right? To leave a little bit of a legal analysis or a legal acumen or a lawyering skill in them in terms of looking at things in a critical way, looking at your worst case situations and how you cover for them, looking at risk profile of
Correct.
a particular transaction or strategic decision that you're looking at, right? So it's always a collective decision, and that's what a general manager would do, right? And that's what general counsels become when they transition into the GC.
Yeah. I think this is a often misunderstood part of, I don't think, I mean, for frankly, when I moved from an external into an internal role, I also moved for personal reasons, because, I mean, we were looking to start a family and I thought it was not sustainable to have those kind of working hours. Little knowing that working hours are quite hard. Even here,
Not always.
Not always. Yes, of course, not always. But then I think that goes
There
for all jobs. Yes, definitely not always as compared to law firm life. That you have to admit. But I think for me also, what you said, the ambit of your role is so wide, and I think as external, we are used to telling the client that this is what you have to do. If the client doesn't do it, it's the client's problem. It will never become yours. The problem is when you get onto that chair internal, now you are only the client.
Yes.
So you can't say, I think you should do this. If you don't do, it's your problem. Like, I think taking that ownership, which you just said, where it's part of the collective decision.
Yeah.
That's a real shift. Yeah. But do you see, because you've been a general counsel or head of legal of various industries, you've not been confined to banking in that sense. How have you seen the GC role sort of evolve, especially in the banking and fintech payment space, which is quite dynamic?
Yeah.
How have you seen it evolve?
So look, the industry has become very complex, right? There are pockets of the industry which are highly regulated. Financial services, for example, payments, for example, pharmaceuticals, certain part of manufacturing, mining. These are all very complex and highly regulated business. So it is imperative on the GC and also the general management of the company to make sure that you're on the right side of the law, both in letter and the spirit, but also, look for opportunities within that law, right? So if, for example, mining concessions come up for grabs, right? You have a strategy in hand, you have all the stakeholders aligned to bid for the right opportunities and then make them happen, and then, you execute on them, right? Similarly, in payments world, right? You can choose to be in certain pockets, or you can choose to diversify, right? For example, you could choose to be only confined to payments support to merchants, or you could choose to be, only operating with card issuers, right? Or you could choose to sort of, be into prepaid cards or wallets, for example, right? So there are various different kinds of, businesses or activities that a fintech could get into. But somebody may, take a much larger picture and say, okay, I'm going to be a Visa or a MasterCard or a Amex of the world tomorrow, right? And which means that I'm going to look at everything, holistically and develop solutions which are, innovative and which are customer centric and which offer, a low price point of completing transactions within fractions of seconds, whilst maintaining, a good risk management profile, right? So, so that inspires innovation in the industry, that inspires, development of new sort of technologies, new ways of doing business. And traditional businesses have to adapt to that model, right? Either you, learn and, adapt and you grow your own sort of profile in that aspect, or you partner, right? So these are some of the decisions that you have to make, in such regulated industries. Whilst on other side, right, people management has become very critical, right? Now, look, in the COVID world, we had situations with people working remotely, right? That gave rise to
Moonlighting.
Moonlighting, right?
Oh, God.
There's so many challenges,
Yeah.
right? How do you make sure that the productivity is maintained?
Yeah.
How do you make sure you care for the employees' mental health and their engagement, right? All of that was so important. And then when you had returned to office, right? How do you make sure that you get people back into office, right? You get back into the traditional work environment. You emphasize collaboration. You emphasize working together as a team. You emphasize collective decision making, collective responsibility, and all of this stuff. So that becomes very important, right? And then it's about technologies as well, right? How do you use, everyone is today, for example, talking about AI, right? Now, do you blindly adopt AI, or do you calibrate your way through, right? What parts of AI do you find useful? And then if you find certain things useful, what technologies to adopt, and all of that. These are very, very important decisions, right?
Yeah.
Which would prompt you to try, test, evaluate, and finally adapt and adopt, right?
New technology.
What is good for you, right? And of course, people should not do that blindly. They should look at cost profile. They should look at long-term sustainability. They should look at so many other factors, right? What is the right fit for business in terms of technology profile? So there are so many aspects of lawyering and so many aspects of a GC's world. And you can't just be expected to be a master of all, right?
Yeah.
You have to be a jack of all trades. You have to be able to find the right solutions, find the right resources to solve your problem as well, right? Whether it is through internal networking, external networking, whether it is through going to the right experienced people to guide you, or doing the try and test approach, right? Or just sort of learn from others, right? So you read, experiment, watch videos or whatever. Right?
Yeah.
There's so many different ways in which you can learn and sort of adopt in your business, right? So these are some of the things that I
you see
think has helped the GC evolve into what it is, what the role is today.
Yeah, you've given me so many segues to ask you so many questions. It's like you're like perfect answer. Thank you very much.
Khichdi.
I'm like going to pull from that. But so many things you said. Maybe I'm relating more to this conversation because there's some amount of lived experience. But if I have to ask you to pick, say, one trait, maybe it could be an unconventional trait, I don't know, that you think a GC has to, or anybody aspiring to be heading a legal department, etc., should cultivate for now, as in, go for the future, now to future. What would you say that should be?
Well, I think I would take two examples here, right? The first example is, related to what I said earlier about being black and white versus being flexible, being practical, solution-oriented approach, etc. And I'll give you a live example of what I've lived through. Knowing your business is so important, right? And in the past, when we were dealing with a huge arbitration claim, right, in an electricity, environment, just by talking to the engineers, just by understanding how electricity is produced and transmitted, going and visiting the plants, right, studying the engineering aspects of the law, we were able to establish that the other side had not met its obligations of providing a redundant line of transmission, right?
Which is
for example,
required.
like if you transmit electricity, you have a line which can take, say, 400 megawatts of electricity, but it is not safe because you need to have a fall-safe arrangement. So then you built a redundancy, you built double the capacity, right? So that there is a fall-safe arrangement. And the other side had to build both the main line and the redundant line. They didn't build the redundant line, right? Because of which our claim was successful. Now look, this we would not have known just by reading material, just by acting as a black and white lawyer, right? But just by expanding your remit, looking at things beyond the box, right? Talking to people, talking to right stakeholders, engaging them, right? We were able to sort of present the best picture for the organization. So that's one example that illustrates, right, how you have to tune out of a conventional mindset. The other example I would give is on empathy. Right? Lawyers, unfortunately, have a lot of ground to cover to learn empathy. Right? We love talking. I love talking. Right? I've been talking the entire evening. Right? But it's very important to engage people, and for engaging people, you need to exercise empathy. Right? Empathy means you step into the shoes of the other person, really understand how the other person would feel and how the other person would want to receive the communication, and then devise your communication accordingly, right? And this I learned again by being a father, right, of two very lively and interesting children, right? Because when you're working with people, right, and especially family, you don't you're not associated with them only for 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, 5 year period. They are part of you, right? They are your responsibility. You have to develop them. You have to sometimes discipline them. You have to have their best interests at heart all the time. And that's the same thing that happens in the team at work, right? You have to work with them as family. You have to invest in them. You have to sometimes develop them and give them constructive feedback. But end of the day, you're on the same side of the table, right? So empathy is very, very important. Tuning out and and let me give you an example, right? If I have to say that, look, I have evaluated this project and I think legally it sounds kosher and you must do it, right? How would you feel? You would feel, oh God, this guy is imposing on me. He's acting very smart, and people hate smart people, right? And lawyers are generally sometimes the smartest people in the room, right?
Oh.
And they have very little patience, so they just are direct and they say, okay, this is it, and get over with it or get on with it, right? But instead, you just tune out and say, look, how would you feel, if I offered this opportunity to you, right? Or I would maybe ask the question that, what are the various ways in which you feel this works for us in future, given that legal situation is same or legal situation is managed and all of that, right? So in that process, by asking the right question, you're prompting an engagement from the person. You are and you're achieving the same result, right? By actually making it seem like it's the other person's decision.
It's a collaborative,
right?
Yeah.
You will end up by making a friend. You will end up by building trust and a good relationship for future. And maybe sometimes you can call in that chit also in future sometime, right?
Course,
you need help, right? So look, this is again an evolution. A lawyer, when he's transitioning from practicing world into in-house world, sometimes has to learn these leadership skills, learn these skills of managing people and stakeholder engagement.
Actually, I'm going to take this as it's a great tip. I unfortunately learned this the hard way because I had to present to our board and I completely bungled it horribly. Whatever I wanted to didn't happen. Whatever the company wanted to 100% didn't happen. What my boss wanted didn't happen at all, which I got to know in my appraisal. But in any event, this is a very good, and this you're very correct. It is something that we need to develop. You're right.
Let me give you another example. So this I learned at a Harvard Law School program. It was Professor Ashish Nandi who did a program with us, GCs in India. It was organized by a law firm. And he said, look, when he was talking about negotiations, right? He said, very often we set up adversarial positions in a negotiation. We always emphasize that we are right, and we always try to justify why we are right, right? Instead, if you calm yourself down, look at the big picture that both of us are trying to close a deal, for example, right? And what is it that will get us there? Put yourself in the shoes of the other person and then understand the rationale of why the person is arguing in a certain way. Also, avoid the use of adversarial terms like but, right? For example, right, if you're saying, okay, I want this, right, clause in the agreement. You said, no, but, right? You use the word no and but. The moment you use these terms, you're setting yourself up against the other person. You're saying that you are on the other side, I'm on this side. However, you can rephrase the same argument and say, I hear you. I understand this is what you're saying, right? Which means you're acknowledging the other person and respecting that other person. And they say, and here is another way of looking at the same thing, considering that there are these other circumstances and all that. How would you like us to play with it, right? So you're doing several things here. One, instead of using but, you're saying and, which means together, right? So which means that you're keep putting the other person on the same side. Secondly, you're saying we have to solve it together, right? So again, the person's prompted to think that he's with you, right? And you are both trying to achieve the same end and the same goal, right? And he's going to work with you then. He or she is going to work with you then, right? So look, I mean, again, this is tuning. This is leadership skills. This is empathy. And I think you'll get to learn and experiment with it a lot when you're on the in-house side of the world.
One thing you said, and I read this in another interview, I think that you'd done some time ago, where you were talking about your team. I mean, you spoke about your team and how you said that, ultimately we are all like a family, and you need to sometimes discipline, sometimes, basically you need to get everyone to work together. I remember you had said in another interview that you emphasize being happy. We,
Yeah.
we discussed this even before we started recording. And I thought that was a very interesting thing. And I really wanted to ask you about it. What do you mean by that? How do you do it? How do you ensure that everyone's buy-in is there mentally, physically, emotionally, everything into the job?
I am a firm believer of the concept that happy people are productive, right? If you have anything either at work or in your personal life which is coming in the way of happiness, then you can't be fully efficient, fully productive, right? And the job of a colleague, of a team leader is to unshackle, right, those difficulties, whether it's personal or, and sometimes you can't solve personal problems, but you can just maybe, lend an ear, right? Be sympathetic, empathetic, provide some kind of, accommodations like, leaves or, some mental health,
Support.
opportunities or things like that, right? Some counseling, or sometimes, financial support. You don't know, what the person needs, right? If you are able to help, great. If you're not able to help, at least, being empathetic to that person and trying to understand and trying to be a friend is a great job done, right? And then it's at workplace as well, right? If a person is struggling, how do you coach the person? How do you mentor that person? How do you guide that person, right? Because really the development of the person is in your own interest, right? So, celebrating small wins, giving appreciation, right? Giving very good constructive feedback. And when you're giving feedback, of course, do it indoors. When you're appreciating people and rewarding people, recognizing people, do it in public, right? These are small little things that help in building trust, building camaraderie in a team environment, right? And they go a long way in building very successful, powerful, cohesive teams.
And now I want to come to this whole part that you spoke about when you spoke about AI and tech. And you have been, to let us put it this way, you started an in-house role probably when the tech invasion was not so much.
I remember in the late 90s when we started out, right? The only piece of tech that we had at that point of time, of course, internet had just come in. So there was some Google search, but there wasn't much material on Google anyway back then. And then, we had, I think, SEC Online or those kind of CDs.
Manu Patra was there,
CDs that you would put into, old
SEC
systems.
used to come with CDs.
Yeah. And then there were no head notes and searching was really difficult.
Very rudimentary,
right? I miss those times.
Actually,
no, you had to read a lot.
We had to read a lot, and we were much better because not only would you know what you are doing, you would know what your person who's sharing your own desk is doing. So if they are working on some banking work and you've been given some real estate work, but there's some banking, question, you're going to ask them, "Arey yaar, padha kya? Wo kya bola?" So this was a time when all of us, just was fun, and that time is never going to come back. Because we are all using AI today, and we are all using everything. But what would you say are some of the considerations for you when you're evaluating some sort of technological solution for your professional support or what have been your considerations? Let's put it that way. So
look, I'm a big believer in tech. Okay. In the early 90s, I was exposed to computers because I used to go to my uncle's place and, he had some, old 8086 machines and I used to play a lot of games on them, right? And they were very interesting games back then as well, right? Which involved a lot of maneuvering.
With those up and down and side keys, that's all you can use.
Use of control X and control N and control M and all of that stuff, right? So I would say by having that exposure to technology, and being familiar and comfortable with computers helped me, gain a competitive advantage in my career early years, particularly. Right? So there's an interesting story. I was in between two schools, and one school had a April to March session, and another school had a January to December session. So I had 3 months in between. I jumped the class. I didn't do my class 8.
Nice.
Right? So I jumped from class 7 to class 9 and saved about 9 months of time.
Wow.
And during those 3 months, my grandfather enrolled me into a typing course, right? Perhaps he was thinking that if he doesn't become anything, he'll at least become a typist and a stenographer or whatever, right? But I think in hindsight, it was the best move that happened with me. Because when I learned typing, right, I could type faster tthan anybody else, right? With 40 words per minute speed and all of that stuff, which means that I could do my work, finish my work at the firm, right, much faster than others, which means I was given more and more work and responsibilities. And that helped me, grow very, very fast in my career, right? So things like these, right? Now, typewriter is a very simple, instrument, right? But the typing skills and how you hone those skills and how you apply them in your work area right? That makes a huge amount of difference, right? And being familiar with computers, like I said, always made a difference. So I could, adopt technologies, experiment with technologies, right? Very, very comfortably, right? So when Manupatra and systems like these came, LexisNexis and others, right? We could do search, we could, do a lot of work on research and customize some of the, stuff online as well, right? And then when, newer technologies like AI have come, we are able to sort of experiment and see. Now, your question on what considerations you have in terms of adopting technology, right? The first consideration is what problem are you trying to solve, right? You should not just blindly adopt a technology if everybody else is doing so, right? Because it takes a lot of cost, a lot of effort, a lot of resources, and a lot of disruption as well, right? When you're trying to change things at workplace, people have to change, right? Making people change is incredibly difficult, right? And sometimes those disruptions can be so destructive for the organization. People may leave if they're not comfortable, right? You have to factor that in as well. So understand what problem are you trying to solve. Are you trying to solve an efficiency problem? Are you trying to solve a storage problem? Are you trying to solve an analytical problem, right? What problem are you trying to solve here, right? If you have too much litigation to manage, yes, you need a tool, you need a technology tool. But then what is the right fit for purpose, right? So that's the next question. If you have identified a problem, you want to solve it, right? You have seen others solve it, by use of technologies. Then you go to the question of, okay, which technologies to adopt? What is the right fit, right? And then what's the right cost point as well, right? How do you make the transition? How do you train people? How do you sort of, slowly make the transition, get the buy-in from people, right? And then, sort of start using it. And how do you evaluate as well? What is the return on that investment, right? So there are so many of these factors, right? But it starts with, is there a problem you're trying to solve? How big is that problem? Is there a right technology fit for that problem? And are you ready at the evolutionary stage of your team, of your organization to adopt technology, right? Because you just don't want to blindly do it and disrupt everything and, have disillusioned people and people leave and, you're back to square one on things, right? Look, this prompts me to go back to your question on general counsels, right? What do general counsels do differently from other lawyers, right? And I said, look, they are general managers to start with, right? A lot of people globally, have made a transition from being a lawyer to becoming business managers, and very, very successful. There's some examples in India as well, right? We know a few, right? But look at the world around. A lot of successful politicians are lawyers. A lot of successful administrators, diplomats are lawyers, right? A lot of successful business people are lawyers, right? So there is, a training in analytics. There's a training in summarizing. There's a training in logical reasoning. There's a training in trying to, get to the point and solve a problem. There's a training also in engaging the right stakeholders, reaching out, escalating at the right point of time. These are some of the trainings and tuning, right, that a lawyer has, which is unique. And I think we should leverage that. We should all leverage that, right? Because this is...
We recognize it first.
It is. We should. We are evolved, species.
I'm happy to endorse that. I mean, we can tell each other, and hopefully people on the internet will tell us. But coming back to the tech part of it, I was talking about, when you were talking about, do you have a problem to solve, etc. One of the newer sort of solutions, it's not that new, it's quite old now, but is the whole concept of digital signatures. And we were all part of the generation when there was no digital signatures. And then it came, and then, we had all of these circulars that would come within the organization that now we will use this, and then, how we would keep calling up our company secretary saying, kuch hota nahi hai, kuch samajh mein nahi aata hai, kya hai. So, I mean, of course, Zoho Sign is our sponsor, so we are plugging that in here. But how do you see this whole adoption of digital signatures? How do you see that sort of helping? Do you see any advantage of it today? How do you see that arc developing?
Well, look, digital signatures is only one part of the whole contracting journey, right? And it does solve for execution of documents, particularly when people are located in different geographies, right? Physical signing is a problem because it takes time in sending physical documents across, right? So it does solve for that. And during COVID, we've seen it was a great boon to have, companies provide digital signing solutions, right? And we've in fact followed through after COVID as well, because it was so easy to execute contracts, right? Archive contracts as well, right? So because most companies who offer digital execution services also offer archiving, also offer document trails and things like that, right? Evidence of signing and audit trails of system records, etc., which is very, very important in the legal world, right? But I would say that in a contracting journey, execution is the last part of it.
Correct.
But well, not exactly the last, but maybe a penultimate part of it, right? Because you also have execution of the covenants of the contract, and then sometimes disputes come up, and then you have to relook at the contract terms and conditions, and sometimes you have to have compliance enforcements within the contract. So there are other steps as well, right? But let's look at formation of a contract itself, right? Starts with the sales process in most organizations.
Correct.
You have lead generation, right? You follow through on leads, right? How do you develop those leads? How do you follow through? Right, that's a process which technology can do wonders in digitizing and providing sort of the right tech platform for. Also. And then how does it translate into commercial terms, right? Partnerships, right? And then how does it translate into drafting of the contract, right? With legal help, right? So and then how do you sort of evolve the various stages of the contract making process and negotiating process and all of that stuff and the record keeping around it. So I think I would say in the entire contract life cycle, right, starting from a business opportunity and a lead generation to ultimate execution and also enforcement of the contract, right? There's a lot of work that technology can provide and bring efficiencies in.
That I agree, especially standardizing.
Yeah.
And what you said about storage.
And then look at things like if suppose you have a standard contract, right? Like you have a standard product and you have a standard product agreement, right? Legal provides its inputs when you're negotiating a contract with a counterparty, right? And then the business team has to come back to legal again and again when there are different negotiating points, right? Whereas if you use a tool and provide fallbacks on each and every clause, right? The fallback number 1, fallback number 2, fallback number 3, and impose some conditions, right? If they are fulfilled, you can use this fallback option, right? You are then enabling the front-end team, right?
Correct.
A team other than legal team, right? To be able to manage those contracts without the engagement of legal team, right? Now, it of course brings in a lot of efficiencies, but lawyers are generally very protective about their turf, right? So it is very difficult to convince lawyers to adopt this strategy. But then they can then focus on higher value stuff, right? They can focus on new product development. They can focus on business growth through strategic options and all of that stuff, right? Just move up the value chain, right? Look at technology solutions to provide problems at the low end, and then you evolve yourself to the higher levels.
I wanted to ask you a follow-up question on this, but I think somewhere you have sort of answered this. So I'm going to go and ask you another one, which is in the next 5 years, what would you say is on your legal tech visual? We are seeing huge amount of work in the legal tech space, or maybe I was just living under a rock that I feel that there's a huge amount of work that's happening. But what would you say is in your sort of wish list in the next 5 years?
I would say, look, the traditional areas where legal technology has been used are litigation management, contract lifecycle management. I would say like lead generation, sales process, and all of that stuff, right?
And now the execution part of it.
Also M&A, right? Because virtual data rooms and due diligence exercise, etc. Tech platforms are incredibly useful. I see that in the next 5 years, AI would play a huge role, right? In terms of deep analytics, in terms of throwing up business growth opportunities, throwing up opportunities where you could have synergies in acquisitions, for example, right? Throwing up opportunities where regulatory developments carve out a niche space for you to play in, right? And there are many such factors, like the new Digital Data Protection Act is going to open up opportunities for consent managers, for example, right? There are similar such opportunities in every industry, every regulatory sphere, right? So AI can help you identify and leverage those opportunities, right, and help you sort of develop your expertise and products in that area, right? How else? Dispute resolution. I think we will need to get into the next stage of identifying the root causes of some of the disputes and then trying to solve for those root causes, right? Sometimes, for example, if you are getting a lot of problems in a particular product and there are a lot of customer complaints and claims, etc., maybe AI can help you rectify that problem at the root, right? and avoid litigation, or you could have preventive litigation strategies, suggested by AI for certain group of litigants and things like that, right? So there are various ways in which I think deep analytics can help in solving problems at the root cause level. Areas like cybersecurity, right?
Yeah.
Huge opportunities, because threats are becoming more and more complicated. People who are players in this area, criminals, are becoming more sophisticated.
Yeah.
They have access to those tools as well, right?
Yeah.
So how do you protect yourself, right, against ransomware attacks, against system attacks, against cybersecurity threats of the nature of fraud and things like that, right? So that's again going to be a huge area where AI can play a role. Compliance management, right? Now,
Yeah.
compliance is evolving from being just tick the box exercise to playing a proactive role in
In your
identifying
valuations.
leaks, gaps,
Absolutely.
right? Risk areas,
Yes.
right? And many a times, you are not working alone. You're working with so many counterparties, and you don't have control over other counterparties, right? Or your partners, or processors, or people who provide you services, or some kind of inputs into what your goods and services are in the market, right? Because you don't control their systems, you don't control their environment, you don't control their people. That is a huge risk profile,
Correct.
right? Now, how do you deploy sophisticated tools to do surveillance and to do monitoring of the behavior of other people and your own world as well, right? So these are some of the areas where I think AI is going to play a huge role. 5 years, in 5 years, of course, I'm actually rooting for flying taxis, right? As the next tech revolution. I'm really hoping that I can make my way from Bengaluru airport to my office in Whitefield in 30 minutes flat, instead of spending 2 hours on the road.
Like now, if anyone tells me that we'll meet in Western, like Andheri and beyond, I'll say I'll see you in Pune.
Yeah.
Because I'll reach faster. My God, really. That I'm also hoping for flying taxis.
But other than flying taxis, I think we are going to see a huge impact of AI in how we do business, how do we do work, how do we manage our personal lives. It's not going to be the end of the road, right? Because a lot of things that lawyers do in terms of applying empathy, applying their personal experience of how things play out. Like, for example, when you're in a court, right? A human being can understand what mood the judge is in. So yeah, it does open up opportunities. It has risks that you need to manage, but I don't think it's going to cause an end of the world scenario.
Yeah, I agree. I want to just plug in that one of the reasons why we want to dealing with any kind of new solution for their legal firms, maybe one of the things that you also need to keep in mind is the security features. Whether they are, so like there are solutions now, like for example, e-signing solution here in Zoho Sign, they have a sort of inbuilt security feature that is there. So maybe one of the considerations is also how safe and secure your...
Probably the most important consideration.
Today, now with the requirements of the DPDP Act now on us.
Not just that, but just imagine a situation where you're dealing with multi-million-dollar contract, right? Someone can hack into your system, change the terms of your contract.
Can you imagine?
Right? And you're not able to trace it. Someone can execute that contract on your behalf even when the terms have not been settled, right? And impose serious legal obligations on you. Right? Now you can fight it to the end of the world, right? But look, these are very serious problems.
Right?
Absolutely. The tech has to be reliable, has to be robust, has to be fit for future, has to be sustainable. There are so many different facets of technology that you need to consider when adopting a legal solution.
Correct. I agree. Now, the last question I have to close out this section is, if you had to look back at your professional life, is there anything that you wish you had not done?
Oh, there are a lot of things.
Oh, okay.
One, I would not have rubbed a lot of people on the wrong side, right? Because I've learned, I've grown with age, grown in wisdom, with my family being there, me becoming a father and all of that stuff, right? I've realized how important relationships are, right? So I would have definitely invested in them and changed my behavior a lot in my earlier years, right? Second, I think I would have certainly, if I had the family resources to sustain me for some time in the late 90s and early 2000s, I would have definitely given a shot to litigation world, right? Because that's what my original passion was. That's what got me into lawyering, right?
You mean counsel practice?
Yes, it's the thrill of arguing a case in the court. It's the thrill of thinking on the feet. It's the thrill of having your clients sort of whole life in your hands, and doing your best, and exercising all of your legal acumen, your understanding, your experience, your learnings, etc., into that high stakes matter, right? So that the adrenaline rush and the excitement, but also the responsibility, right, to act in the best interest of the client, that is simply unparalleled.
Correct.
Right. So I would have definitely given that a shot. The third thing I would change is, if I go back to 20 years, I would save more. I would not be
Nice.
adventurous with my investments. I would not like to act smart. I'm a lawyer, so I'm not an investment professional. I recognize that. Possibly invest in SIPs, right, to start with from day one. Because I've made many unwise financial decisions in my life, and I've struggled with them.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah, these are three things I would perhaps want
So
to
very nice.
relive
Very
differently.
true. Yeah, very true and very genuine answer actually. And you've given a nice segue into our last the last section is called 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So I ask you 5 of something, 4 of something. And I ask this because I love hearing the answers. So this part I do for myself. And these are smaller, like typically shorter answers than what we've done in the previous section. So you're ready?
Yep.
Okay. So 5 productivity tips.
5 productivity tips. Okay. Organize your workspace, in terms of priorities,
Achha.
right? Use tools like calendar management, work lists, things like that, right? I've found that blocking times in your calendar for me space, right, in terms of catching up on stuff, or using, meetings, etc., right? Or just generally, rewind time is so incredibly helpful. It provides you the boost that you need to sort of work for the other time slots. Second is use of more personal relationships, right? What can be done over a phone call, don't depend on an email. What can be done by walking across to a person, don't depend on phone call, right? So use that a lot. Use a lot of these little meetings before meetings, right? So in order to get the stakeholder buy-in, just go talk to people before the actual big meeting takes place, understand what they are on to, what their views are, and try to address them beforehand instead of running into a meeting without preparation. They say if I had 10 hours to chop a tree, I would spend 7 hours sharpening my axe.
Yeah.
Right. There is no alternative to
For
preparation.
preparation.
No alternative. The harder you prepare, the more meticulous you are in your preparation, the better you are.
Yeah.
Right. Would you rather, be on the surgical table with the most charismatic and the most modern lawyer, or with a person who's done 1,000 surgeries, right? But maybe old and whatever, right? You have that answer.
Yeah.
If you're in jail, would you go to the most seasoned lawyer to bail you out, or would you go to the person who uses technology the best, or you use AI, for example? So look, one other point I would like to add, which is delegate. Okay, as team leader, you need to trust your team, right? Delegate effectively, right? Make sure that you provide enough operating space, and also back your team up, right? In case they run into problems, you should be there to support, but delegate. You can't do everything on your own, right? So engage your team properly, trust in them, give them the responsibility, give them the backup, give them the power, right? And then be on their side, be their back.
Okay, this is because you said you've grown up reading Perry Mason and Stanley Gardner and all of that. 4 books that you would recommend. Need not be law books. It could be whatever you want. Okay,
interesting. So one of the books that has influenced me the most is a book called Autobiography of a Yogi. It's the life story of Paramahansa Yoganand, and I've read it several times. And whenever I picked it up again, and I still
always
sort of
learn something.
Yeah, you learn something new. You're always fascinated about another aspect of what is there in it, right? So you learn that there is so much life beyond the realms of what exists normally and what is able to be perceived normally with your faculty. The other book I would recommend to people is The Secret by Rhonda Byrne. Always very, very fascinating. I saw the movie several times. I read the book several times. The most interesting thing about that book is it teaches you the importance of gratitude. Teaches you that you have to appreciate what you have. The other thing that book teaches you is power of positivity, power of positive attitude, power of helping others, power of maintaining a positive view on life, positive visualizations, right? Because the world really doesn't exist beyond you, right? If you close your eyes, you can be in whatever world you want to be, right? So that's another thing. The other books are Ikigai, the Japanese philosophy, the things like 7 Habits of
Highly effective
successful,
people.
highly effective people. These are some of the books I've kept reading and kept learning from a lot, and they've influenced a large part of what I am today. And of course, then there are these Perry Masons and Dan Browns,
Yeah.
and tend to see that a person has applied out of box thinking.
Yeah.
A person has applied just an analytical mind to look at things which are generally ignored by most people, right?
Yeah.
And that's what lawyering is also about, right? Lawyering is also just about finding the right edge, the right sort of maybe 5% of the whole case, which can just turn things around for you, right? So yeah, I mean, you have a lot to learn and be inspired from these books.
I agree.
So Jenna, one other book that I would recommend to people is a book called Smartest Guys in the Room. It's a book about the Enron disaster, right? And how Enron played with different structures which were, well, termed innovative at that point of time, right? Sometimes they played with the letter and spirit both of the law, and how it led to disasters. But what it shows is the role that a lawyer plays, and how important a lawyer's job is to ensure that their client and their organization has the right culture, the right ethical sort of conduct, right? And how ethics matters a lot in terms of the success of an organization, right? And what disasters people could end up with if they are unethical, right? So yeah, as a lawyer, it's very important to know your boundaries.
Okay, 3 tips that you want to give lawyers, young lawyers, law students.
Build relationships. First one, very, very important, right? Be nice to people, help others, right? Learn from people, connect with people. You don't know when in life, people who will come around and help you. You can call in a chit, right? When you're in a difficult spot. But I think one of the key factors for where I am today is because I have built a lot of friends, a big network, right? I've taken part in many social activities. Second is have an open mind to learning, right? Always have a curious cat approach, right? Be explorative, right? Like technology, right? I mean, if you're a traditional lawyer who, like a criminal lawyer, for example, right, who handles criminal trials or handles bail applications or things like that, right? There's no harm in trying to learn about technology, right? Because you may end up having a cyber law case, a cyber fraud case, for example, right? Or you may need to trace and argue about evidence in an electronic world, right? So be a curious cat. Learn, read, talk to people, a lot, right? Everyone has something or the other to teach you, right? As long as you're open to learning, right? Third thing is to a young lawyer, I would say never give up on opportunities, right? There will be many opportunities that will come your way, right? Have an open mind. Think very, very carefully. I'm not saying that you jump jobs every 6 months or 1 year if there are opportunities like that, right? But I'm saying opportunities to work on challenging projects, opportunities to work in an area which terrifies you, right? Because you're not used to doing it. Well, you'll learn, you will adapt, right? The first person to scale the Mount Everest hadn't been there, right, before, right? So the first person to go to Antarctica hadn't been there before, right? First person to land on moon hadn't been there before, right? So there's always the first time, right? Be very, very open, open to challenges, open to sort of explore new areas, new territories, right? Learn, believe in yourself. Okay. Firstly, find the right passion. Okay. Find what you're really, really interested in. Find what you're passionate about. So if you're pursuing law, are you passionate about litigation? Are you passionate about mergers and acquisitions? Are you passionate about intellectual property? Find your right niche and then be the best at what you do. Okay. Work as hard as you can, right? Explore every possible, limitation, boundaries, cross those boundaries, right? Nurture yourself, right? Learn, nurture, grow, right? But be the best at what you do, what you pursue. If you honed up your skills to such a level that you are, when people talk about expertise, your name crops up, right? Then every other factor of success will follow you, whether it is money, whether it's fame, whether it's positions, whether it is, having a seat at the table, right? Anything will follow. So find your passion, invest in yourself, be the best at what.
Nice. Okay, 2 life lessons you have learned in your life so far, personally.
Life lessons, I think I spoke about them, right? Investing is one big lesson, right? Invest for the future from day one.
Yeah.
Whether it is
And
investing in your
invest
own
wisely.
professional, sort
Growth.
of development and growth, or investment in terms of the money, right? Financials, right? Be very meticulous about it, right? It is a sacrifice, right? Instead of buying a big fat TV or a big fat car, right, very early in your career, right? Save some for the rainy day. It does help. It provides you a lot of comfort knowing that yes, you have a corpus, built up for bad times, right? During COVID, a lot of people lost their jobs.
Yeah.
But if people who had a lot of corpus with them were comfortable. People who didn't struggled, right? There could be emergencies. You could need money for your family, right? But it's very, very important to build this, right? Because you will retire at some stage, and you would want to lead a very, very comfortable life after retirement, right? So and you'll lead families.
Yeah.
Right? Families have needs.
Yeah.
Right? Children have needs.
Yeah,
right?
of course.
Education is not getting any cheaper.
Yeah.
Medical treatment is getting very, very expensive, right? Holidaying is very, very expensive.
Yeah.
And you would want to holiday every few months when you are retired, right?
Yeah.
So all of this needs a corpus, needs money, invest wisely. These are some of the life lessons I would say I would leave people with.
And it's a very practical thing also.
It is.
Very practical. And finally, the one best piece of advice you have received.
Interesting. When I was a student, right, my grandfather forbid me to contest elections in my law school, right?
Achha.
And in the year that he was having a surgery, I of course withdrew, my candidature then. But then there were a lot of rumors, and that I was kind of forced into doing this, etc., etc. So because of the rebellion in me, right, I did go back and lost the election the next year, right? But the life lesson that my grandfather left me was avoid distraction. You are in the law school to study law. You are in the law school to build a career, right? Invest in that. Be single pointed. Be one pointed in your approach. Have a constancy of aim and object, right? Very, very, very important life lesson, right? Don't be distracted. There are many things that the world will do. Some people will play sports. Some people will gamble. Some people will party very hard, right? What are you there for? You are in the law school to study law, become a great lawyer. Invest in that. There will be lots of times to party. There will be lots of times to enjoy in a casino, if you like gambling, right? There will be a lot of times in future to go holidaying in different parts of the world. But when you are doing what you're doing, right, be fully focused on it. Will be one pointed in your approach. Have constancy of aim. And
lovely. And with that, thank you so much. I had a wonderful time actually just chatting with you. I hope you had a good time.
I had a great time.
This video is sponsored by Zoho Sign, which is a comprehensive digital signature solutions for Indian business. If you are an Indian business looking to sign loads of contracts or agreements, pay stamp duties, or authenticate signers, look no further than Zoho Sign. Zoho Sign is legally recognized under the Indian Information Technology Act and is trusted as a signature solution provider by companies such as Paragon Footwear, ACG World, and more than 40,000 such companies. With Zoho Sign, you can quickly sign, send, manage documents, and automate signature workflows. This lets you close deals and execute legal agreements faster than ever. But what about security, you ask? Zoho Sign's digital signatures use cryptographic techniques backed by digital certificates to ensure security, provide proof of identity. In addition, Indian businesses can authenticate your signers via Aadhaar-based ID verification and also pay stamp duties and generate e-challans with the e-stamping feature. Zoho Sign is beloved by customers against competitors for its straightforward pricing, adaptability across business verticals and sizes, and a no-compromise compliance. It is a must-have for law and legal tech folks who are looking to streamline and digitize their. For detailed demo and queries, reach out to Zoho Sign on the email addresses given in the description below.